My family planned to turn me into a wedding babysitter for 15 kids, so I walked away instead. Charlotte Fitzgerald was 72, the kind of age people imagine comes with peace and soft routines. Tea in the afternoon, quiet evenings, the relief of having done the hard work of life already. She'd earned that picture the old-fashioned way, by raising her child with devotion, by burying her husband too soon, by carrying on through grief with her spine straight and her heart still open. What she hadn't earned, what she never expected to face at this stage, was the sour taste of being treated like a household tool. Her son Marcus was getting married again. He was 45 now, old enough to be steady, old enough to know better, old enough to understand what it costs when someone gives you their time. And Charlotte, for months, had given him everything she had to spare. Not because he demanded it, at least not out loud, but because she was a mother and that word had always meant something to her. She'd decided early that this wedding would be her gift. The kind you can't wrap in paper, the kind you build with late nights and lists and aching knees and a mind always calculating what else might go wrong. She promised the buffet first. That was the biggest piece. She ran the numbers like she always did, pencil tapping against her kitchen table while sunlight came through the window and dust floated in it like quiet snow. Ingredients for 150 guests. Enough meat, enough salads, enough sides, enough desserts that people would leave full and happy and praising how generous Marcus's family was. She knew the estimate would land somewhere around $3,000 if she kept it sensible, and she told herself that was worth it. She could make money again, but this day, was supposed to be once in a lifetime. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. Then she added more. Centerpieces, because she had a good eye and a steady hand. Decorations, because she'd done it before for birthdays and anniversaries and church dinners, and she wasn't the sort of woman who did anything halfway. Vendor calls, schedules, deliveries, backup plans. The whole thing began to feel like a second job, except she did it smiling, because she thought she was building something beautiful for her son. And Tiffany had made it easy to believe it was appreciated. When Marcus first brought her around 2 years earlier, Tiffany had seemed like a blessing dropped into Charlotte's life after a long season of loneliness. Tiffany was polite in that glossy, practiced way that some people have, but at first it didn't read as fake to Charlotte. It read as respectful. Tiffany called her Miss Charlotte, like it mattered. Tiffany brought flowers on visits. Tiffany offered to dry dishes after dinner and praised Charlotte's cooking with wide eyes and a sweet laugh. Marcus is so lucky, Tiffany would say, touching Charlotte's arm like they shared a private warmth. He grew up with meals like this. No wonder he's such a good man. Marcus would glow when Tiffany spoke like that. He hadn't glowed much since his first wife died. It had been years, but grief didn't keep calendars. Charlotte remembered that time clearly, her son moving through days like a man underwater, his voice smaller, his eyes always searching for something that wasn't there anymore. Seeing him laugh again, seeing him hold Tiffany's hand with real softness, felt like a door opening in a dark house. Oh, Charlotte leaned in. She let herself hope. She included Tiffany in traditions, shared old recipes, told stories she didn't tell just anyone. She began to picture a future where she wasn't only mom, but also, in some way, family to the woman her son loved. That hope was why the betrayal landed so hard. It happened on a Tuesday, ordinary as bread. Charlotte was in her kitchen mid-afternoon, flour dusting the counter, a notebook open beside her with columns of quantities and notes. She was building the final shopping list for the buffet. Her mind was in numbers and timing, how many pounds of meat could roast at once, how far ahead salads could be prepped, which desserts would travel well, which ones needed to be baked the morning of. Outside on the patio, voices drifted in through the open door. Marcus was home for a short visit, pacing while he took a work call. Tiffany had brought her sister Audrey, who was visiting from out of town. The two women sat together, their laughter rising and falling while Marcus spoke into his phone with his business voice. Charlotte didn't pay attention at first. Their chatter was background noise, just more life moving around her while she worked. Then she heard her name. Not Mom. Not Miss Charlotte. Her name, plain and sharp, carried in Tiffany's voice with a certain brightness that made Charlotte's hands pause above the paper. She moved closer to the kitchen window that looked out onto the patio, careful without thinking about it, as if her body already knew this was something she didn't want to be seen hearing. She held the curtain back a fraction and watched through a narrow gap. Tiffany was leaning toward Audrey like they were sharing a secret. She wore the same pleasant face she always brought into Charlotte's home, but something about her eyes looked different. Less soft, more calculating. "I've got everything handled for the kids," Tiffany was saying, voice warm as honey. "There'll be like 15 of them. Babies, little ones, a few teens. But Marcus's mom is going to watch them the whole reception, so the adults can actually relax." Audrey laughed, loud and careless. "That's genius. So she's basically your built-in nanny. Free." Charlotte's stomach tightened. She told herself she'd misheard. 15 kids. Whole reception. Watch them. The words didn't fit together in any way that made sense. Tiffany laughed too, and the laugh wasn't the one she used at Charlotte's dinner table. It was lower, sharper. "Exactly. She's perfect for it. She'll just do it, you know? She always does. She won't even realize we're using her." Audrey snorted. "Does she even know?" "We didn't have to ask directly," Tiffany said, waving a hand like it was nothing. "Marcus mentioned there would be kids there, and she immediately offered help. She's always offering. So we said yes. It's basically handled." Charlotte felt heat rise under her skin. First confusion, then the slow burn of realization, oh, that was it. Not a request. Not a conversation. Not, "Would you be willing?" Just an assumption dressed up as convenience, turned into a plan and passed around like a clever trick. Tiffany kept going, her voice dropping again as though she enjoyed the cruelty of it. "And honestly, it's better this way. If she's busy chasing kids, she won't be hovering around the adults all night. No offense, but you know how moms can be. Always talking, always inserting themselves." Audrey laughed harder. "Oh my God, yes. Like please, we don't need old stories about when the groom was little." Tiffany giggled, and Charlotte felt that sounded like a slap. Right. Plus she won't even have time to sit and eat much. Which is fine because the buffet is for the guests who actually matter. They both laughed at that. Charlotte's mouth went dry. Her hands were still dusted with flour, her fingers slightly curled as if she'd been interrupted mid-task and forgotten how to finish the movement. She thought of the money she was about to spend, the long hours she'd already poured into planning. She thought of the way Tiffany had smiled at her, called her Miss Charlotte, praised her cooking, accepted her generosity with both hands. All of it, suddenly, looked like something else. A performance. A method. A person putting on softness so she could reach into Charlotte's life and take whatever was useful. Marcus's voice rose suddenly as his call ended. He walked back toward the patio table, cheerful. "What are you two laughing about?" Tiffany's tone snapped into sweetness so fast it was almost frightening. "Nothing, just wedding details. I was telling Audrey how organized everything is. We've got the kids sorted out. Your mom will keep an eye on them so they don't get in the way." Marcus smiled, proud as if that plan were a compliment to Charlotte. "My mom's amazing. She's always helping. I don't know how she still has the energy." Tiffany murmured something that sounded supportive, but Charlotte heard the faint edge underneath, like a blade hidden under a ribbon. Charlotte let the curtain fall back into place. Her heart was beating too hard, too fast, thudding in her chest like it wanted out. She stepped away from the window and leaned her hand on the counter to steady herself. The kitchen smelled like sugar and butter and the beginnings of celebration, and suddenly that smell made her feel sick. She went upstairs with slow steps. Not because she was fragile, but because her body had gone tight with the effort of holding herself together. In her bedroom, she sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the familiar shapes of her life. Framed family photographs, the quilt she'd kept since her husband was alive, the little lamp she turned on each night when the house felt too quiet. She looked at Marcus's graduation photo and remembered being younger, carrying him through difficult years, telling herself the work was worth it, telling herself family meant loyalty and love and showing up. she had shown up. Again and again. And now, in the mouth of her future daughter-in-law, she was the old lady. A convenient pair of hands. A way to keep the real adults unbothered. It wasn't only anger that hit her. It was the humiliation of realizing she had been generous in a way that made people comfortable disrespecting her. It was the grief of seeing that kindness, in the wrong hands, could be turned into a leash. For a few days, Charlotte acted normal. That was the strange part. It took effort, but she did it. When Marcus called, she spoke gently. When Tiffany visited and chirped about how Charlotte should relax and enjoy, Charlotte smiled and nodded. Her face stayed calm. Her voice stayed steady. Inside, something new was hardening into clarity. Charlotte had spent her life learning how to survive. She had survived widowhood. She had survived lonely years. She had survived building a steady life with no one to catch her if she fell. She was not going to spend her 70s being treated like hired help, especially not by the very people who claimed to love her. But why Wednesday morning, she made a call. Loretta answered on the second ring, breathless like she was always in motion. Loretta had been Charlotte's closest friend for over 40 years, the kind of friend who didn't need a warm-up conversation. Charlotte, Loretta said, already suspicious. What happened? Tell me. Charlotte told her. Every detail. The patio. The voices. The laughter. The way Tiffany switched tones like flipping a light on and off. The way Marcus spoke proudly, unaware he was praising a plan built on disrespect. When Charlotte finished, there was a brief silence on the line, heavy, loaded. Then Loretta exhaled in disgust. That girl is dangerous, she said flatly. And your son, Lord help him, he's being foolish. I'm not going to scream, Charlotte said, surprising herself with how calm her voice sounded. I'm not going to beg for respect. I'm going to teach them what it costs to treat someone like that. Loretta's voice sharpened with interest. Okay. I know that tone. What are you thinking? Charlotte looked out her kitchen window, at the patio where the conversation had happened. Her hands were steady now. I'm thinking, she said, that if they've assigned me a job without my agreement, I'm going to resign. Loretta gave a short laugh, half delighted, half fierce. Oh, Charlotte. Yes. Tell me everything. Charlotte laid out the plan in quiet steps. Not impulsive. Not reckless. Controlled. If Tiffany and Marcus were comfortable assuming Charlotte would work for free, then they could learn what happened when that labor disappeared. Loretta's reaction was immediate, like a match catching. That is brilliant, she said, sounding almost gleeful. And before you feel guilty, don't. They earned this lesson. Charlotte didn't feel guilty. Not yet. What she felt was something she hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Not the cruel kind. The kind that comes when you stop asking permission to protect your own dignity. On Thursday, she began making calls. Not dramatic ones. Just practical ones. She called the suppliers she'd arranged for the buffet ingredients and cancelled what she could. She called the florist and cancelled extra arrangements. She accepted a few small penalties, money she would have spent anyway, and treated them like tuition paid for a necessary education. On Friday night, she packed a small suitcase. Just enough for 2 days. Clothes, medications, a book she'd been meaning to read, a few personal comforts. She moved quietly through the house, folding pieces of herself into the bag like she was preparing to step into a different version of her life. Marcus called that evening, cheerful, unaware. Mom, he said, voice warm. How's everything looking? You okay? Need me to come by? Charlotte held the phone to her ear and looked around the kitchen where she'd planned to cook until her back begged for mercy. She pictured herself at the reception, coral dress wrinkled, hair coming loose, chasing children she didn't know while their parents drank and danced. I'm fine, she told him. Everything is going to be exactly as planned. Marcus laughed, relieved. You're the best, Mom. We don't even know how to thank you. Charlotte's smile was small and private. You don't have to thank me, she said. Just enjoy your day. When she hung up, she didn't cry. She didn't slam cabinets. She didn't rage. She simply wrote a letter. She wrote it clearly, without cruelty, without insults. She named what she'd heard and what it meant. She explained the consequences. She told Marcus she would return the next day. She signed it with love, but also with a boundary. She placed the letter on her kitchen table where Marcus would see it, right where he always Saturday. Then she slept a little. Not much, but enough. Saturday arrived before dawn. Charlotte woke at 5 with a strange, bright energy under her ribs. She showered, did her hair, and chose a coral-colored dress she loved. Elegant, confident, the kind of dress that reminded her she was still a whole person, not just someone's helper. It wasn't the dress she'd planned to wear to the wedding. That dress stayed hanging in her closet like an old expectation. T7. Loretta pulled into the driveway, punctual as promised. She stepped out with a grin and 2 suitcases like she was arriving for a grand adventure. "Ready?" Loretta asked, hugging her tight. Charlotte hugged back. "I've never been more ready," she said. They drove out of the city toward a lakeside spa Charlotte had booked with the money she would have spent feeding and serving a room full of people who wouldn't even ask her permission to breathe. The road opened up, trees blurring past, and with each mile Charlotte felt something loosen inside her. T10, they arrived. The place was quiet luxury. Manicured grounds, soft music, air that smelled like citrus and clean linens. The receptionist greeted them warmly and offered them mimosas. "Are you celebrating something special?" the receptionist asked. Charlotte accepted her glass and smiled, real this time. "Yes," she said. "I'm celebrating learning to put myself first." She had barely settled into her room, a suite overlooking the lake, before her phone began to buzz. Marcus. She watched the screen light up, then go dark. Again. And again. She didn't answer. An hour later, she was on a massage table, warm stones and skilled hands coaxing tension out of her body that she hadn't even known she was carrying. When her phone buzzed again, she felt a flicker of satisfaction that surprised her. Not because she wanted him to panic. Because she wanted him to finally notice that she was not an automatic resource. By lunchtime, she and Loretta sat on a terrace with white tablecloths and food served to them, not made by them. The lake gleamed under the sun. Loretta lifted her glass and looked at Charlotte with admiration. "You okay?" Loretta asked. Charlotte stared out across the water. "I'm better than okay," she said softly. "I feel like I've been holding my breath for 2 years." At 3, Charlotte turned her phone back on. The screen filled with missed calls. Texts piled up like falling dominoes. The messages grew more frantic as they went. "Where are you? Please answer. Guests are arriving. What about the food? What about the kids?" Charlotte read them slowly. Her pulse stayed steady. She took a breath that tasted like clean air and freedom. Then she called Marcus. He answered on the first ring, voice strained and panicked. "Mom, where are you?" Charlotte leaned back in her chair, sun on her skin, lake breeze in her hair. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. "I'm at a spa with Loretta." There was a sound like Marcus swallowing panic. "Mom, you can't. The wedding is in an hour. People are here. There's no buffet." "Tiffany." Charlotte let him talk until his words ran out of air. Then she spoke evenly, like a woman stating facts. "Did you read my letter?" A pause. "Yes," Marcus said, voice smaller now. "But Mom, this is humiliating. We don't have time to fix this." Charlotte's tone stayed calm. "Marcus, you made a plan that included my labor without asking me. You didn't think you needed time to check with me, so why do you need time now?" "Mom, please," he said, and his voice cracked on the word. Charlotte closed her eyes briefly. She loved him. That was true. Love didn't vanish just because someone disappointed you. But love did not require self-erasure. "I'm not coming," she told him gently. "You and Tiffany will need to solve your own wedding." The line went quiet except for distant chaos. Voices, movement, maybe children, maybe adults demanding answers. Marcus sounded stunned. "You're really not coming?" Charlotte opened her eyes and watched sunlight sparkle off the lake. "I'm really not coming," she said. And as she ended the call, she realized something else, something she hadn't expected. For the first time in a long time, she felt calm. Not numb. Not cold. Just calm. Because she had finally chosen herself. Marcus's voice stayed lodged in Charlotte's ears long after she ended the call, but the sound didn't carry the power it used to. It wasn't that she didn't care. It was that she'd finally stopped letting panic from other people become her emergency by default. Around her, the spa remained serene. Soft music, the distant hush of water, the scent of citrus and warm oils. And for the first time in months, Charlotte could feel her own breathing without it being interrupted by guilt. Loretta watched her carefully over the rim of her glass. "You did it," she said, half proud, half astonished. Charlotte set her phone face down on the table as if it were simply another object, not a leash. "I did," she answered. Her hands were steady. Her heart still hurt, but hurt and weakness were not the same thing. They went back inside for the next treatment on their schedule. Charlotte lay on a table while a therapist worked fragrant oil into her shoulders, kneading tightness that had built there from years of carrying everyone else's expectations like sacks of flour. For a while she let herself disappear into the sensation, into the warmth, into the proof that comfort did not have to be earned by servitude. When the treatment ended, she stepped into the lounge area and checked her phone again. More calls. More messages. Now there were numbers she didn't recognize. People who had never once asked how she was doing, but who could suddenly find her when they needed something from her. She scrolled slowly, reading the frantic language, the blame folded into pleas. Someone wrote that guests were asking questions. Someone else wrote that the photographer was waiting. Someone else warned her that this was unforgivable. Charlotte felt a strange clarity as she read. In all the noise, not one message began with, "I'm sorry." No one said, "We didn't ask and we should have." Not one acknowledged the actual wound. The only thing they were desperate about was the inconvenience of her absence. That, more than anything, confirmed she'd done what she needed to do. Loretta leaned closer. "Any apology yet?" Charlotte let out a quiet laugh, not amused so much as resigned. "Not a real one," she said. "Just panic." They had dinner at the spa's restaurant that evening, a place that looked out over the lake as the sky turned rose and violet. The food arrived in elegant portions, served by staff who smiled without needing anything in return. Charlotte ate slowly, tasting each bite, realizing how long it had been since she ate without thinking about who else needed to be fed. Halfway through the meal her phone rang again, and this time the name on the screen was not Marcus, not Tiffany, not an unknown number. It was Elena, her late husband's sister. Charlotte hesitated, then answered. Elena didn't waste time. "Charlotte," she said, voice sharp with concern and irritation. "Marcus called me in tears. He says you didn't come to the wedding. What in the world is happening?" Charlotte took a slow breath and told her everything. Not dramatically. Not with theatrical outrage. Just the plain truth. What she overheard, what they planned, what they assumed, what it felt like to be turned into a tool while she was spending her retirement and her strength to make their day happen. Elena was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Good." Charlotte blinked. "Good. Good," Elena repeated, firmer. "Someone needed to stop this. Your son is a grown man, and he's acting like a child who expects his mother to clean up every mess. And that girl," Elena's voice hardened like stone, "that girl has a cruel mouth." Charlotte felt something in her chest loosen. Not because she needed validation, but because she'd been bracing for someone to tell her she was being dramatic, selfish, old, difficult. Hearing Elena's immediate certainty felt like a hand on her shoulder. "Elena," Charlotte said softly, "I keep thinking maybe I went too far." Elena's laugh was short and humorless. "Too far would have been what they did to you. Planning to hand you 15 children without asking you. Treating you like hired help while you bankroll their wedding. That's too far." Elena told her other relatives were already talking. Some were furious at Marcus for allowing it. Some had always found Tiffany's sweetness a little too polished, a little too convenient. And more than one person had said, out loud, that Charlotte had deserved better. When Charlotte ended that call, she stared at her phone for a long moment. It still buzzed occasionally, but it no longer felt like a demand. It felt like static. Later, back in her suite, she stood on the private terrace and looked at the water under the moon. The air was cool. The world was quiet in a way her life hadn't been for years. She thought of the coral dress she'd worn that day, how it had been a choice made for herself, not for anyone else's approval. She thought of the letter she'd left and the calmness in her own handwriting. For a second, the image of Marcus as a boy rose in her mind. Small hands, scraped knees, wide eyes when he came to her for comfort. She'd been his safety then. Maybe that was why he'd fallen into assuming she would always be safety now, even when it cost her everything. But a child's need did not excuse a grown man's entitlement. Charlotte went inside, put her phone on silent, and slept. On Sunday morning, she woke before Loretta. The spa room smelled faintly of clean linens and lavender. Charlotte made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the lake ripple with early wind. When Loretta met her for breakfast, she took one look at Charlotte's face and frowned. "You're thinking too hard." Charlotte smiled. "I'm thinking enough." They ate slowly, fresh fruit, warm bread, coffee, and as they ate, Charlotte realized something had shifted permanently. She didn't feel like she was running away. She felt like she was returning to herself. Around noon, as they packed, Charlotte checked her phone again. There were new messages from Marcus. The tone had changed. Less frantic, more exhausted. He wrote that the wedding had been chaotic. That people had ordered last-minute food, pizza, something expensive and messy. That some parents left angry. That someone's child had knocked over part of the dessert table. That Tiffany was in tears. That he didn't know what to do. Then came another message, sent later, quieter. "Mom, can we talk when you get back?" Charlotte stared at that one the longest. It wasn't an apology, but it was at least a doorway. Still, she didn't answer. Not yet. She wanted to come home, sit in her own chair, and hear his voice without the noise of a crisis demanding quick forgiveness. They drove back in the afternoon. The city came into view again, traffic, buildings, the familiar tension of daily life, and Charlotte felt a flicker of dread, not because she regretted her choice, but because she knew what came next would matter. When she reached her house, she stepped inside and paused. The place smelled like home. Tea, faint lemon cleaner, wood polish, and yet it felt different. Maybe because she was different. She set her suitcase down and looked around her kitchen, where she'd planned to cook for hours, where she'd once believed love meant exhaustion. She made herself a cup of tea, sat in her favorite armchair, and let the silence settle to 6. The doorbell rang. Charlotte's spine straightened instinctively. She already knew who it was. She moved to the window and looked out. Marcus stood on her front step alone, shoulders slumped, hands shoved into his pockets. He looked older than he had a week ago, as if embarrassment and consequence had pressed new lines into his face. Charlotte opened the door. "Hi, Mom," Marcus said quietly. "Hello, Marcus," Charlotte replied. Her voice was calm. That calmness seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. He stepped inside like a man walking into a room where he expected punishment. He sat on the sofa. Charlotte sat in her armchair across from him, leaving space between them, space that used to be filled with automatic forgiveness. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Marcus exhaled, long and shaky. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words sounded strange in his mouth, like something he'd rehearsed but still didn't know how to hold. I'm really sorry." Charlotte nodded once. "I'm listening." Marcus rubbed his hands together, eyes fixed on the carpet. "When we found your letter," he began, "I thought it had to be a misunderstanding. I thought maybe you were overwhelmed and you panicked." Tiffany was furious. The guests were showing up. Everyone was asking questions. And then the kids, he swallowed. The kids were everywhere. Charlotte didn't interrupt. She let him feel the weight of his own words. "We ended up ordering food," he continued. "It cost a lot. People complained. Some people left early. Tiffany's sister had to watch some of the children, and she was angry. And the whole time, Mom, I kept thinking, why didn't we plan this? Why did we assume?" Charlotte leaned back slightly. "Why did you?" Marcus's face tightened. He looked up then, eyes red-rimmed. Because you always say yes. The simplicity of it hit the room like a dropped plate. Charlotte held his gaze. Do you understand what you just admitted? Marcus nodded slowly. Yes. Charlotte waited. She didn't rescue him from silence. She let him sit with the truth until he had to speak it aloud. I treated you like a solution, Marcus said, voice breaking. Like you were there to fix things. Not like you were a person with your own limits. Charlotte's throat tightened, but she kept her expression steady. And Tiffany? Marcus hesitated. She said awful things, Mom. When I finally told her exactly what you overheard, she tried to deny it at first. Then she cried. Then she got angry again. Then she said it was a joke. His jaw clenched. But it wasn't a joke. It was contempt. Charlotte's eyes stayed on him. Did you defend me? Marcus looked down. No, the admission sat between them, heavy and plain. Charlotte nodded once, as if she were recording facts. All right. Marcus's voice rose with desperation. Mom, I didn't realize. I swear to you, I didn't realize what it sounded like. I thought. He stopped himself, then tried again. I thought it was normal. That family just help. Charlotte's voice softened slightly, but not into surrender. Families help when they're asked, Marcus. Families help when it's mutual. And help is not the same as being assigned a job. Marcus pressed his fingers to his eyes. I know. Charlotte let the silence stretch again, then spoke in the same measured tone she'd used when she raised him. Here's what I need you to understand. This isn't only about one wedding. Marcus looked up, confused. It's about a pattern, Charlotte said. 2 years of assuming I'm available. 2 years of treating my time like it belongs to you. 2 years of Tiffany smiling while she takes. Marcus swallowed hard. I didn't see it like that. I know, Charlotte said. That's part of the problem. Marcus leaned forward. Mom, what do we do now? Tell me what you want. I'll do it. I'll fix it. Charlotte's mouth curved, not in humor, but in something sharper. You can't fix it the way you fix a broken appliance, she said. I'm not something you repair so you can go back to using me. Marcus flinched. Charlotte continued. What you can do is change how you treat me. Starting now. Marcus nodded quickly. Yes. Anything. Charlotte spoke slowly, clearly, like a list she expected him to remember. First, you ask before you plan. If you want my help, you can ask me. You don't assume and you don't volunteer me to others. Marcus nodded. Second, Charlotte said, when I say no, you accept it. No guilt. No pressure. No, but Mom, like my boundaries are a problem you need to negotiate. Marcus's throat bobbed. Okay. Third, Charlotte said, at family events, I am a guest. Not staff. Not the childcare plan. Not the unpaid labor behind the scenes. Marcus whispered. I understand. Charlotte held his gaze. And fourth, if Tiffany disrespects me again, you will not stay silent. Marcus's eyes filled. You're right. I should have stopped it before it ever got this far. Charlotte's voice softened just a fraction. I'm not asking you to choose between your wife and your mother, she said. I'm asking you to choose decency. Marcus nodded so hard it looked almost painful. I will. Another silence fell. This one felt different, less like a wall, more like a bridge being tested. Finally, Marcus asked the question he'd been carrying. Do you forgive me? Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. I love you, she said. That doesn't change. But forgiveness isn't a switch. It's something you earn back with time and actions. Marcus wiped his face with the back of his hand. That's fair. He stayed a little longer, and they talked like they hadn't talked in months. Not about schedules or tasks or favors, but about feelings and choices. Marcus admitted he'd let Tiffany take over the social planning, that he'd assumed whatever she arranged was reasonable, that he'd been relieved not to think about details. Charlotte listened. She didn't excuse him. She simply understood the shape of the weakness. Avoidance. Convenience. The same traits that let a person slip into entitlement without realizing they become someone they wouldn't respect in someone else. When Marcus finally left, he paused at the door as if he wanted to say something else. He didn't. He just looked at her with an expression Charlotte hadn't seen on him since he was young. A kind of chastened fear, the awareness that he'd hurt the one person he thought would always absorb the damage. After he drove away, Charlotte sat in her armchair and stared at the quiet room. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired. But it was a clean tiredness, not the exhausted defeat of being used. Over the next few days, the silence from Marcus and Tiffany was almost startling. No calls asking her to do things. No texts hinting at expectations. Charlotte found herself moving through her days with a lightness she hadn't realized was possible. She tended her garden again. She cooked meals only when she wanted to. She went for a walk without checking her phone every few minutes. She read on her back porch in the late afternoon sun and realized how long it had been since she'd let her own life take up space. Then one evening Marcus called. "Mom," he said carefully, like he was learning how to speak to her again. "Tiffany wants to come talk to you." Charlotte's grip tightened on the phone. Even now, the thought of Tiffany sitting in her living room made her chest go tense, like her body remembered disrespect before her mind could process it. "Does she want to apologize?" Charlotte asked. "Or does she want to smooth things over so she can go back to having what she wants?" There was a pause. "I think she's ashamed," Marcus said. "I think she's scared you won't listen, but she wants to try." Charlotte looked out her window at her garden, at the flowers that had survived neglect without complaining. "Tell her she can come," Charlotte said. "Thursday, 4 o'clock. "Thank you, Mom," Marcus said, voice thick. "I'm doing this for me," Charlotte replied, "not to make things comfortable for her." Thursday arrived with cold clarity. T exactly 4, the doorbell rang. When Charlotte opened the door, Tiffany stood there looking nothing like the polished woman who brought flowers and smiled like a magazine cover. Her hair was pulled back simply. No bright lipstick. No careful jewelry. She looked younger, smaller, and for the first time, human in a way Charlotte had never seen. "Miss Charlotte," Tiffany said softly. "Thank you for seeing me." Charlotte stepped aside. "Come in." Tiffany entered like someone stepping into a room where she knew she'd done wrong. She sat on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles looked pale. Charlotte took her usual armchair and waited. Tiffany's voice trembled. "I don't know where to start." "Start with the truth," Charlotte said. Tiffany swallowed. "I'm sorry," she began, and tears shone in her eyes before they fell. "I'm sorry for what I said about you. I'm sorry for treating you like something we could use." Charlotte's face stayed calm. "Why did you say it?" Tiffany flinched at the directness. She looked down at her hands. "Because I was insecure," she whispered. "And because you were so capable. Everyone loves you. You're strong. You have this presence. And she shook her head. "I didn't know how to fit in." Charlotte didn't soften. "That explains insecurity," she said. "It doesn't explain cruelty." Tiffany's shoulders sagged like she'd been expecting that. "I know," she whispered. "I don't have an excuse that makes it okay. I grew up without a mother after I was 15. And my dad remarried someone who wasn't kind. I learned to protect myself by acting like I didn't need older women. Like mothers weren't important." Her voice broke. "Then I met Marcus and you, and instead of being grateful, I felt threatened. And I turned you into labor. A role. Something I could control." Charlotte watched her carefully. The story might be real. The tears might be real. But sincerity wasn't proved by emotion. It was proved by what someone did when emotion passed. Charlotte asked, "Do you want a relationship with me, Tiffany? Or do you just want Marcus to stop being upset?" Tiffany took a shaky breath. "At first," she admitted, I wanted to fix it because Marcus was miserable. But after the wedding, after realizing what I'd done, I realized I'd ruined the chance to have something real with you. She looked up then, eyes wet. Not because I need you to do things for me. Because I wanted a family. And I didn't know how to be part of one without trying to manage it. Charlotte sat very still. She let the silence stretch until Tiffany had to sit inside it. Finally Charlotte spoke. "I'm not your mother," she said quietly. "No one can replace your mother. But I can be your mother-in-law. That means we can have respect, and we can have boundaries, and we can have kindness if you choose it." Tiffany nodded rapidly. "I want that. I want to choose it." Charlotte leaned forward slightly. "Then hear me clearly," she said. "I don't trust you yet." Tiffany's chin trembled. "I understand. You will have to show me," Charlotte continued, "with actions over time, that you see me as a person, not a resource." Tiffany wiped her cheeks. "What can I do to start?" Charlotte held her gaze. "Stop performing," she said. "Be honest, even when honesty isn't flattering. And tell your sister Audrey the truth. Fully. Don't let her walk away thinking she can speak about me that way and shrug it off as a joke." Tiffany nodded. "I already told her," she said quickly. "On Monday. I told her we were wrong. She feels ashamed. She wants to apologize." Charlotte's expression didn't change. "I don't need her apology," she said. "But I do need her to understand she can't talk like that about me. Not in my house, not anywhere." "She understands," Tiffany whispered. Charlotte sat back again. "All right," she said. "Here's what happens next. You get one chance." Tiffany's breath caught. "If you treat me like an employee again," Charlotte said, voice calm as winter air, "there won't be a second conversation." Tiffany nodded, tears spilling again. "I won't," she said. "I promise." Charlotte's eyes narrowed slightly. "Don't promise," she replied. "Show me." Tiffany stood slowly, like she didn't know if she was allowed to move. At the door she turned back, voice small. "Miss Charlotte," she said, "how do I be a good daughter-in-law?" Charlotte studied her. The question sounded almost childlike, but sometimes the most important questions were the simplest. "By being a good person," Charlotte said. "Ask instead of assume. Appreciate instead of use. Respect people's no. And remember that favors come from someone's life, someone's time." Tiffany nodded as if she were trying to memorize every word. "Thank you," she whispered, then left. After the door closed, Charlotte sat alone in her living room for a long time. She felt no rush of victory, only a cautious, tired hope. The next weeks would tell the truth. And they did. For the first time in 2 years, Marcus and Tiffany did not call her for favors. They didn't send texts that began with expectations. They didn't appear at her door with last-minute needs. At first, Charlotte wondered if this was silence as punishment, but slowly she realized it was something else, respect. Then came the first test. Couple of weeks later, Marcus called in the evening, and Charlotte recognized nervousness in his tone immediately. "Mom," he said, "I need to ask you something." Charlotte didn't answer right away. She waited, letting him feel the weight of asking instead of demanding. "Tiffany's birthday is Saturday," Marcus continued. "I want to do something special. I already booked a small caterer, and I've got the backyard set up, and I invited her friends. But I need help with decorations. You're really good at it." Charlotte blinked. "You hired food?" she asked, surprised. "Yes," Marcus said quickly. "And if you say no, that's okay. I can hire someone to do the decorating too. I wanted to ask you first." Charlotte felt something soften inside her. Not because he was finally planning well, but because he'd offered her a true choice without resentment. "I'll help," she said. Marcus sounded relieved. "Thank you, Mom." "And Marcus," Charlotte added, "you don't need to pay me for that. I'll do it as a gift. But I appreciate that you asked." "I'm learning," Marcus said quietly. The hard way. Saturday arrived bright and clear. Charlotte went to Marcus's house with her sleeves rolled up and her mind ready to create beauty without being trapped in obligation. Marcus had all the supplies: balloons, ribbon, flowers, lights, and he watched her like a student watches a teacher, attentive and respectful. They worked as a team, not as boss and employee. They laughed. Marcus asked her opinion and then actually listened. When Charlotte needed a break, Marcus didn't sigh or rush her. He handed her water and told her to sit. When Tiffany arrived that evening, expecting a simple dinner, the surprise hit her full in the chest. Friends jumped out. Lights flickered on. The backyard looked warm and festive. Tiffany's hands flew to her mouth. She cried, not the dramatic, performative crying Charlotte had seen before, but the kind that happens when joy catches you off guard. Marcus hugged her, beaming. "Happy birthday." Tiffany looked around, stunned. "This is incredible," she breathed. Marcus nodded toward Charlotte. "Mom helped with the decorations," he said proudly. "She's got the best eye." Tiffany turned to Charlotte immediately and hugged her, gentle, careful, as if she didn't want to assume intimacy she hadn't earned. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's beautiful." Charlotte returned the hug lightly. "Happy birthday," she said. All night, Charlotte watched for signs. Old patterns. Quiet disrespect. The kind of small dismissal that revealed what someone truly believed. But Tiffany included her. Marcus included her. They seated her at the main table. They introduced her as family, not as the person who handled the work. When someone complimented the decorations, Tiffany didn't take credit. She pointed to Charlotte. "Miss Charlotte designed it," Tiffany said without hesitation. "She's amazing at this." That small honesty, giving the credit where it belonged, did more than any speech could have done. Charlotte didn't trust Tiffany fully yet, but she felt the foundation of something new being laid. Not servitude, not obligation, but choice. And Charlotte realized, as she sat under the string lights with the laughter of a party around her, that she was finally living a different kind of love. One that didn't cost her dignity. In the weeks that followed Tiffany's birthday, Charlotte paid close attention, not with suspicion exactly, but with awareness sharpened by experience. She had learned the hard way that change announced during a crisis could evaporate once comfort returned. Apologies were easy when consequences were fresh. Respect was proven when no one was watching. First, the quiet itself felt strange. Her phone no longer rang with casual assumptions disguised as affection. No one asked her to just help real quick. No one hinted that she'd be disappointing anyone if she declined. Her days stretched open in ways they hadn't in years, and Charlotte realized how much of her time had been quietly claimed without ceremony. She filled those days deliberately. She returned to her morning walks, letting the rhythm of her steps steady her thoughts. She spent afternoons in her garden again, coaxing life from soil that had gone slightly wild during the wedding preparations. She cooked when she wanted to, not because someone needed feeding. And in the evenings she read, sometimes novels, sometimes old cookbooks with handwritten notes in the margins from women long gone. One afternoon, as she sat on her porch with a cup of tea, her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. Charlotte considered letting it go to voicemail, but something in her told her to answer. "Hello," she said. "Miss Charlotte?" a woman's voice asked, hesitant but warm. "My name is Carol. You don't know me well, but my son was one of the children at your son's wedding." Charlotte's brow creased slightly as memory stirred. Faces, confusion, raised voices, the chaos she'd imagined from afar. "Yes," she said slowly. "I remember. I hope it's all right that I'm calling," Carol continued. I wanted you to know that several of us parents were very upset about what happened that day. We were told there would be someone watching the kids, and then suddenly there wasn't. Some people left angry. But when we found out why," Carol paused. "Well, I wanted you to know we didn't blame you. Not for a second." Charlotte felt a small knot loosen in her chest. "Thank you," she said quietly. Carol sighed. "What they did to you wasn't right. Using you like that, after everything you were already doing?" It left a bad taste for a lot of us. Honestly, I admired what you did. Not many people would have had the courage. Charlotte smiled faintly. Courage comes easier when you're tired of being invisible. Carol laughed softly at that. Exactly. And for what it's worth, Tiffany's father agreed with you too. Charlotte blinked. Michael. Yes, Carol said, sounding amused. We actually met that day. We were both trying to wrangle kids who weren't ours. He was furious when he found out the whole story. He said he'd had words with Tiffany afterward. Charlotte let out a quiet laugh she hadn't expected. The idea of Tiffany's father defending her felt oddly vindicating, not because she needed allies, but because truth had a way of finding its footing. I'm glad to hear that, Charlotte said. Carol hesitated, then added, We've actually been seeing each other since then. Michael and I. Funny how chaos brings people together. Charlotte smiled fully now. Life does have a sense of humor. After they hung up, Charlotte sat for a long while, absorbing the call. The ripple effect of her choice hadn't ended at her family. It had traveled outward, touching strangers who'd witnessed the situation and recognized injustice when they saw it. She hadn't planned that. She hadn't set out to make a statement. She'd only meant to stop being used. And yet, her refusal had done something more. It had drawn a line others could see. A month passed. Then too. Marcus and Tiffany kept their distance in a way that felt respectful, not cold. When they did reach out, it was intentional. Thoughtful. No assumptions. Then one day Tiffany called. Miss Charlotte, she said carefully, would you like to have lunch with me? Just the two of us. Charlotte considered the request. She felt no tightening in her chest, no instinctive resistance. That alone told her something had changed. All right, she said. There's a cafe near my house. Thursday at noon. Tiffany arrived early, which Charlotte noted. She wasn't dressed to impress. No bright colors, no calculated elegance. Just jeans, a soft blouse, hair tied back. When Charlotte approached the table, Tiffany stood immediately. Thank you for meeting me, Tiffany said. Charlotte, Saturday, you wanted to talk. Yes, Tiffany said, folding her hands together. And not to apologize again. I've done that. I know words don't mean much if nothing changes. Charlotte watched her closely. I started therapy, Tiffany continued. After the wedding. That caught Charlotte's attention. Why? Because I realized I don't know how to relate to older women without turning it into a competition or a transaction, Tiffany said quietly. My therapist helped me see that when my mom died, I learned to protect myself by devaluing mother figures. If they didn't matter, then losing one didn't hurt as much. Charlotte absorbed that. It didn't erase what had happened, but it added context. Context wasn't an excuse, but it was a map. And you? Charlotte asked. What do you want now? Tiffany met her gaze. I want to learn how to treat you as Charlotte. Not as Marcus's mom who fixes things. Not as someone I can lean on without asking. Just, as you. Charlotte nodded slowly. That's a good place to start. They talked for over an hour. About expectations. About boundaries. About grief Tiffany had never truly processed. About how Charlotte herself had once mistaken sacrifice for love. There were no dramatic moments, no tearful declarations. Just honesty laid carefully on the table, like something fragile both women were learning how to handle. As they stood to leave, Tiffany hesitated. Miss Charlotte, would you be willing to let me try again? Slowly. Charlotte considered her answer. I already am, she said. But understand this. Trying again doesn't mean erasing the past. It means building something new without repeating it. Tiffany nodded. I understand. Time continued its steady. March. 6 months after the wedding that never went as planned, Marcus invited Charlotte to dinner. His voice over the phone carried a nervous excitement that felt different from urgency. When she arrived, the house smelled of home-cooked food, not hers. Marcus had cooked. The table was set carefully. Tiffany hovered nearby, not in anxiety, but in anticipation. After dessert, Marcus cleared his throat. "Mom, we have something to tell you." Charlotte smiled. "You look like you're about to announce something important." Tiffany reached for Marcus's hand. "We're expecting." For a heartbeat, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then Charlotte stood and hugged them both, laughter and tears mixing freely. "That's wonderful," she said. "Truly wonderful." Tiffany's eyes shone. "We wanted to tell you something else too," she added. "We talked a lot about what kind of parents we want to be. And what kind of family." Marcus nodded. "We don't want to assume anything from you. About babysitting, or help, or anything. We want you to choose what kind of grandmother you want to be." Charlotte felt her chest swell, not with obligation, but with relief. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more to me than you know. What do you choose?" Tiffany asked gently. Charlotte smiled. "I choose to be present without disappearing. Loving without being used. Available when I want to be, not when it's expected." Marcus grinned. "That sounds perfect." That night driving home, Charlotte realized how far they'd come, not because she'd compromised, but because she hadn't. A year later, Charlotte held a copy of her own book in her hands. Tea had started as an idea planted during one of her quiet afternoons, inspired by a conversation with Tiffany about dreams deferred. She'd written about recipes, yes, but also about the stories behind them. About women who cooked not because they had to, but because they chose to. About love freely given, and dignity fiercely kept. The book launch was held in Marcus's backyard. Friends and family gathered. Tiffany helped organize, but she asked first, checked often, stepped back when Charlotte wanted control. Marcus introduced his mother not as the woman who'd helped him, but as the author she had become. Charlotte stood before the group, book in hand, and spoke without notes. "This book," she said, "is about cooking with love, but serving with dignity. It's about knowing when generosity becomes self-erasure, and having the courage to stop before you disappear." Applause followed, warm and sincere. Later that night, as Charlotte signed copies beneath the string lights, Tiffany approached her. "May I call you Mom Charlotte?" she asked softly. Charlotte looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. "I'd like that." As the evening wound down and the guests drifted away, Charlotte sat alone for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of contentment that filled her chest. She was older now. Wiser. Still learning. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that the day she chose not to attend that wedding had been the day she finally attended her own life. As Charlotte moved into the next season of her life, she became aware of something subtle but profound. Time no longer felt like something slipping away from her. It felt like something she owned again. For decades, time had been portioned out to others. First to her child, then to her husband, then to family obligations that quietly multiplied until they filled every corner of her days. Now, time rested in her hands, and she could decide where to place it. The pregnancy changed Marcus and Tiffany in ways Charlotte hadn't anticipated. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily, like people learning to carry something precious without dropping it. They planned carefully. They asked questions instead of assuming answers. They spoke openly about fears instead of hiding behind convenience. And perhaps most importantly, they treated Charlotte's presence as a gift, not a guarantee. Charlotte noticed the difference in small moments. When Tiffany invited her to an ultrasound appointment, she asked first and made it clear there was no pressure. When Marcus called to share updates from doctor visits, he did so with excitement, not expectation. And when Charlotte declined an invitation because she felt tired, neither of them tried to change her mind. The first time she said no without explanation and received only understanding in return, Charlotte sat alone afterward and cried. Not from sadness, but from relief. That simple exchange felt like proof that the lesson had taken root. As months passed, Tiffany grew rounder, softer, more openly vulnerable. She talked to Charlotte about fears she hadn't known how to voice before. About worrying she wouldn't be a good mother. About wondering how to honor her own mother's memory without letting grief define her. Charlotte listened, not as a fixer, not as a replacement, but as a woman who had lived long enough to know that uncertainty didn't mean failure. "You don't become a mother by knowing everything," Charlotte told her one afternoon as they sat together on the porch. "You become one by caring enough to learn." Tiffany smiled at that, eyes shining. "I wish I'd known you could be like this sooner," Charlotte answered honestly. "I wish I'd known I was allowed to be." The baby arrived on a quiet spring morning. Marcus called just after dawn, his voice trembling with joy and fear in equal measure. Charlotte went to the hospital later that day. Not first, not urgently, but when she felt ready. She held the baby in her arms, marveling at how small life could be and still carry such weight. She rocked her grandchild gently. Charlotte made a promise to herself. She would love this child fiercely, but she would not lose herself again. She would be present, but not consumed. She would offer help, but only when it was asked for and only when it felt right. And she kept that promise. Charlotte became the kind of grandmother she had chosen to be. She came over once a week to read stories and drink tea while Tiffany rested. She babysat occasionally when Marcus and Tiffany truly needed help, and when she did, they thanked her like it mattered, because it did. And when she declined, they respected it without resentment. She traveled more. Small trips at first, then bigger ones. She and Loretta finally took the trip to Europe they had joked about for years, wandering cobbled streets and laughing like women who had nothing left to prove. Charlotte wrote in cafes and hotel rooms, her notebook filling with memories and reflections she'd once believed were too late to share. Her book gained quiet momentum. It didn't make her famous, but it reached people who needed it. Women who recognized themselves in her words, who wrote to tell her they had begun setting boundaries of their own. Charlotte answered many of those letters, each one reinforcing the truth she'd learned. Dignity was contagious. In family gatherings, Charlotte noticed another change. Younger relatives watched her differently now. They saw her not as the woman who would always say yes, but as someone whose presence carried weight. When she spoke, people listened. When she declined, no one questioned her right to do so. Tiffany, too, changed. Therapy softened her defensiveness. Motherhood deepened her empathy. She spoke to Charlotte with openness instead of charm, and when she stumbled, as everyone did, she corrected herself without being asked. Over time, trust grew not from declarations, but from consistency. One afternoon, as Charlotte and Tiffany sat together watching the baby sleep, Tiffany spoke quietly. "You know, if you hadn't done what you did, if you had just gone along with everything, I don't think I would have ever really seen you." Charlotte looked at her. "And I wouldn't have seen myself." They shared a small, understanding smile. Years passed. Charlotte turned 75, then 76. Her days were full, but not crowded. Her family felt closer, not because she gave more, but because she gave honestly. Marcus grew into a man who planned ahead and took responsibility. Tiffany became a mother who taught her child about asking instead of taking. And Charlotte remained what she had always been at her core, generous, capable, loving, but now, finally, unapologetically herself. She often thought back to that Tuesday afternoon in the kitchen, to the moment she'd paused mid-list and listened through a curtain. That moment had hurt deeply, but it had also cracked something open. It had forced her to choose between comfort and self-respect. She had chosen self-respect. And in doing so, she had built a life where love no longer required sacrifice of the self, only presence, honesty, and the courage to say no when no was necessary. Sometimes, Charlotte reflected, saying no was not an ending at all. It was the beginning of everything that came after. As the years continued to unfold, Charlotte stopped measuring her life in obligations fulfilled and began measuring it in moments chosen. She no longer woke each morning with a mental list of what she owed to others. Instead, she asked herself a simpler, more honest question. What do I want to do today? The answer varied, and that variability felt like freedom. Her granddaughter grew quickly, as children always do, transforming from a soft, sleeping bundle into a curious toddler with bright eyes and endless questions. Charlotte adored her, but she adored her on her own terms. She visited when she felt energized, stayed as long as she wished, and left without guilt. Marcus and Tiffany never questioned it. They had learned, truly learned, that love offered freely was more valuable than love extracted through expectation. Charlotte became known in the family as someone whose presence mattered precisely because it wasn't guaranteed. When she attended birthdays or holidays, people noticed. When she declined, no one complained. Younger women in the family began coming to her quietly, asking questions that sounded less like curiosity and more like confession. How do you say no without feeling cruel? How do you stop being the one everyone relies on? How do you change patterns that feel older than you are? Charlotte never lectured. She simply shared her story when asked. She spoke about the cost of silence, about how kindness without boundaries slowly turns into resentment, about how love does not require self-erasure. And she watched as something shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily. Fewer women volunteered automatically. More people asked before assuming. Small changes, yes, but meaningful ones. Her book continued to circulate quietly. Book clubs picked it up. Libraries stocked it. Letters arrived from strangers, women in their 60s, 70s, even younger, who said they felt seen for the first time. Charlotte answered when she could, offering encouragement without instruction. She understood now that each person had to reach the moment of choice on their own. Loretta remained her closest companion. They traveled when they felt like it, lingered in places they loved, and returned home without rushing. Sometimes they laughed about the wedding that never happened the way it was planned. Sometimes they fell silent, content in the shared understanding that life didn't end at the moment people expected it to. On Charlotte's 80th birthday, Marcus organized a small gathering. He asked her first, truly asked, what she wanted. Charlotte chose something simple. Family, good food prepared by a caterer Marcus hired himself, and a quiet evening filled with conversation instead of spectacle. To one point during the celebration, Marcus raised his glass. He looked at his mother, older now, yes, but steadier than ever. I want to thank my mom, he said, voice clear. Not just for everything she's done for us, but for everything she taught us by refusing to disappear. The room was quiet. Tiffany reached for Charlotte's hand. Their granddaughter climbed into Charlotte's lap, resting her head there as if it were the most natural place in the world. Charlotte felt a swell of emotion, but not regret. Not sadness. Just a deep, settled gratitude. Later that night, after the guests had gone, Charlotte sat alone on her porch, the same porch where she had once listened to conversations that changed everything. The air was cool. The house behind her was full of memories, but they no longer weighed her down. She thought about the woman she had been before. The woman who believed love meant endurance, who believed being needed was the same as being valued. She didn't judge that woman. She honored her. That version of herself had done the best she could with what she knew. But this version, this Charlotte, knew more. She knew that dignity was not selfish. Those boundaries were not punishments. That saying no did not mean loving less. It meant loving honestly. She knew that family relationships, like all relationships, could only thrive when everyone involved was seen as fully human. Sometimes people asked her if she regretted missing her son's wedding. Charlotte always smiled gently at that question. No, she would say. Because that was the day I finally showed up for myself. And everything that came after was better because of it. As the night settled around her, Charlotte closed her eyes and listened to the quiet. She was no longer waiting for anyone to need her. She was simply living, on her own terms, with her dignity intact, her heart open, and her life fully her own. And that, she knew with certainty, was the greatest gift she had ever given herself.